Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of the FantasyGreek.com's Week 11 starts and sits in 30 minutes here on 87 Sports Fans Radio, powered by 87sportsfans.com, the best sports blog that you don't visit. I am Keith Grieve, here with James Saranteas, better known as the Fantasy Greek. Hello, Mr. Saranteas. How are you?
Keith, I'm doing great. How are you this lovely, lovely day? And you know what? I do visit your blog. I do like it. I do enjoy it. People come out.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it very much. I am much better than I was last Wednesday, causing us to cancel 87 Live, our regular Wednesday night show at 10 o'clock Eastern Time. The plague had struck my house, and ironically, Steve's house, too, and he lives about 20 minutes away, so go figure that.
It is kind of strange. And you know what? While we're on the subject, encourage all our listeners to come check us out on Wednesday nights. I chime in right for that last hour, and we do sort of a NFL Power Hour, I will call it, a review of the previous week's games, and then our predictions for the games the following weekend. It's a lot of fun.
If you like NFL football, you don't want to miss that. I'm just saying. So before we get into it, let's recap. The Thursday night game is already over and done with. The Colts with a 30-27 comeback victory over the Tennessee Titans. Again, to me, we talked a little bit about it on the last episode of 87 Live. The Colts without Reggie Wayne, they just don't seem as cohesive on offense anyway, for whatever reason, whether it's leadership, whether it's intangible, something like that. But by all reports, Andrew Luck gave one hell of an impassioned halftime speech and led the team down the field over and over again in the second half. And for the Tennessee Titans, Ryan Fitzpatrick isn't playing all that bad. They just ran out of gas, it looked like.
My take on it was, as far as the Titans were concerned, the Colts defense really stepped it up and jammed them up. The first half was all about Chris Johnson, who was just phenomenal. I forget how many carries he had, but it was minimal for the amount of production that he got, plus the 2 scores. And in the second half, I think he had 9 carries, and they pretty much shut him down. There was just a complete lack of line blocking on the part of the offensive line, in my opinion, where the Colts, their offense came out and they were just making plays. I would also say that a big storyline was the no-show of Trent Richardson. I mean, it was Donald Brown that dominated the running game for the Colts in what was a run-friendly matchup. The Titans are, one of the better defenses in the league, are notorious for being running back friendly. And I got to think Donald Brown, he's going to be a guy that should be on fantasy rosters that you could use as a flex play from here on out.
That's actually what I was going to, one of the questions I was going to ask you. Is there any reason to hold on to Trent Richardson at this point from a fantasy standpoint?
I think I think in a running back needy league, if your waivers are thin, he's a guy you need to keep for the depth. I think he's a guy that before you cut him loose, that you try to trade because he can still trade it on his name. Otherwise, I mean, if you've got, and I'm obviously this is just theoretical. I don't know this, but if you've got 5 running backs that are all like solid. Let's say, for example, you were able to get Jamal Charles in the second round, Reggie Bush. Then you picked up Noshawn Moreno off waivers. And let's say one other 4th running back like Fred Jackson that everybody underestimated. You might be in a position to, if you're looking at your waivers going, wow, there's a great player right there. I need that player. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't fear those kinds of things at this point, especially if you've got a team that looks like it's going to the fantasy playoffs.
The part about Trent Richardson that scares me is that Chuck Pagano was asked what's going on with him, and Pagano really didn't have an answer. I don't know. Means that I take that as everything on the field, on paper, is pointing to Richardson being successful. He's just not able to do it. So for as much as we panned that trade from the Browns' perspective earlier in the week, it seems like maybe they knew something nobody else did.
And, I was thinking about that myself, and I tend to agree with you. But that's, I suppose, for next Wednesday.
Yeah, we'll skewer that pretty good. All right, so let's go down Week 11's matchups. First on my docket, anyway, is Baltimore Ravens visiting the Chicago Bears. The Bears' defense obviously is not what we thought it to be. Charles Tillman is hurt now on top of injuries, the already existing injuries of Lance Briggs, DJ Williams with the rookie Jonathan Bostic now playing up the middle. very thin at the tackle position as well. Henry Melton still out, obviously, for the year. Stephen Paya has been up and down. Shane McClellan, who had that outstanding breakout game against Green Bay, but has since been injured, still not 100%. For the Ravens, Joe, that offense has been as up and down as any elevator has ever been. The defense, you still don't know what you're going to get out of them week after week. But on the road, I personally am going to pick the Bears in this game.
And Steve, Keith, I agree with you too. I think this is definitely a game where the Bears are catching the Ravens at the right time. They absolutely don't have a running attack. I was looking at the numbers that Ray Rice has been posting, and they're absolutely appalling. And I know they're chalking it off to his hip, or at least that's what I've heard. But the bottom line is, if that's true, we would see more of Bernard Pierce, and Bernard Pierce would be succeeding. So I think there's just a lot of issues in terms of the rush offense that have nothing to do with the health of their players. This is a game where obviously you're playing Matt Forte. He's so versatile. You just can't bench the guy. You're playing Brandon Marshall and Alshon Jeffrey at home. Brandon Marshall, an interesting statistic, I think in all the home games, let's say there's 5, he's got 7 TDs. I mean, he's just guaranteed to score. And I like Martellus Bennett for a good amount of yards. The Ravens are giving up about 90. And for the Ravens, I like Torrey Smith, especially now that Peanut Tillman is out. I mean, you kind of like his chances of actually putting up 101. For the Bears, sort of maybe you play him, maybe you don't. I suppose you could go with Josh McCown. Andy Dalton didn't fare very well against these Ravens, but they're giving up 240 and two TDs per game, and you got to like the offense the Bears have rolled out. I actually like the Bears defense this week, and here's why: the Ravens are giving up, and they're towards the top of the league, about 30 sacks so far this season. That's not the kind of thing that bodes well. And the Bears, even without some of their top playmakers, their defense is okay. They're not a top play, but they're one that you can play if some team, let's say the Chiefs, you might want to consider that second option this week. Outside of that, Flacco, I suppose, is an option, just not a very good one. Ray Rice is an option, just not a very good one. And then, Dallas Clark, he's an option, actually a pretty good one, because the Bears are giving up about 90 to the position.
Sorry, I'm clicking around, and autoplay ads on NFL.com just sunk me.
Oh, my God.
Sorry about that.
Well, we won't. No, that's no problem. So, anyway, that's what I got for this game. I'm picking the Bears, too, and let's get on to the next one.
All right. Cleveland at Cincinnati. Again, Cincinnati, they're a team that I refuse to take seriously. They lose games like they did against Miami, losing on a safety in the end zone. They lost to the Ravens, which, again, I know they're the defending Super Bowl champs here, folks, but they are not a team that strikes awe in any observer's head. So if Cincinnati really wants to be taken seriously, that was a game last week that I feel that they should have won. But now here they are at home against the Browns, who are still riding the Jason Campbell bandwagon. The defense, I think, has been shortchanged by the offense this year. That's a better defense than their numbers tend to lead you to believe, but they are still on the road, and quite frankly, the Bengals are just a better team, and I've taken the Bengals.
Oh, you know what? In this one, I'm actually going to take the Browns. I like the idea that they're coming out of the bye and that they've had 2 weeks to prepare. The game that the Bengals had against the Ravens, I was watching the film on it. Boy, they really looked exposed, especially their offense and Andy Dalton. And this is a much better Browns pass defense than what the Ravens are putting out on the field. In fact, so good that when these two teams met earlier in the season, I believe that the Browns won 17-6. Plus, you got Jason Campbell. The guy in 2 starts has 555 yards passing, 5 TDs, and 0 interceptions. This is the kind of guy that if you need him, boy, you can play him this week. You play Josh Gordon because he's usually money in the bank. For the Bengals, I do like Gio Bernard. I think if they're going to get some sort of an offense going, against the Browns, it's going to be through him. May not be his best game, but look, they're giving up 100 yards rushing, and I think they've given up a TD on average in every game. You start A.J. Green because he's money too. I mean, he does things that the statistics, he confounds them. Now, guys that you sort of might be on the edge and you kind of have to go, you have to make choices, would be Jordan Cameron. He's been really just in the past 5 games, 240 yards, 1 TD. That is what I'm describing as a meager fantasy performance. So consider who your other option is in Cameron and go with, who seems to be the best option. We got the Browns defense. I like them this week. Andy Dalton, he's a decent play, but wow. 215 and 1 to 2 TDs is what the Browns are giving up. Is he going to do that this week? I don't know. Ben Jarvis Greenhouse, I would try to keep him on the bench. And Bengals defense, I'm not liking him because you know what? Jason Campbell hasn't thrown a pick yet. He's done a good job protecting the ball. And for those reasons, I'm picking the Browns in this one.
All right. Next game up, the Washington Redskins travel to the Eagles. You look at the stats. The Eagles are a 5-5 team. They have not won at home, so why would I pick the home team in this one? Well, these teams are so evenly matched when you look at their averages as far as yards on offense and defense. Flip the coin, and this time I feel like I'm picking the Eagles, and I'm confident that they will not let me down at home again. They are 0-4 against the spread at home. Not that I really factor in the point spread, but just the fact that they haven't won yet at home. That fan base is aching for a win, and I'm just not sold on Washington's defense. So that further plays into my philosophy, and therefore picking the Eagles.
Yeah, and Keith, I agree with you. Here's the thing, that the Redskins, no team has scored less than 24 points against them. And for the Eagles, in the past 6 games, no team has scored more than 21, and that includes the Cowboys. So I like everything about this game for the Eagles. To me, this is a game that could potentially be the highest scoring game in all of fantasy. Like, the teams combined for 60 points. So, you play all the money fantasy football guys like Robert Griffin III, Alfred Morris, Pierre Garçon, Nick Foles, LaShawn McCoy. How about that, Riley Cooper? That guy's just amazing. 19 receptions, 449 yards, and 6 TDs when Nick Foles is under center. Deshaun Jackson, he's a must-play as well. Sort of then your choices, and I don't know that this is much of a choice. Tight end Jordan Reed, you got to love that guy against the Vikings. I mean, what did he get? He got about 80 yards in a TD, and he should have had a second TD, but for that no call in the end zone, even though I'm sure Vikings fans could argue about that. But the reality is I think he makes for a good play. I'm taking the Eagles at home.
All right. Washington I'm sorry, we just did that one. Detroit at Pittsburgh. Look, with the Steelers, I have a hard time with this team for one reason only. They cannot run the ball, whether it's because of injuries or whatnot. I predicted them, and I'll hammer this point home just because I want to remind you all that I picked them to struggle this year mightily because they couldn't run the ball before the offensive line became decimated. They are averaging 81 yards a game on the ground, and I'm sure you're going to have some kind of insight on Le'Veon Bell, but to me, that team is just a mess on offense on the ground. If you cannot run the ball, you cannot control the clock, and you will not win. And Detroit is going to put up points, whether you like it or not, and I'm going to pick the Lions on the road.
Yeah, I like the Lions, too, in this one. The biggest reason is really the Steelers' defense. They're a no-show this season except for one game against the Bills. You got to like guys like, Matt Stafford, Reggie Bush, Calvin Johnson. They're pretty much weekly must-starts from here on out. I even like the Lions' defense as a favorable play against Ben Roethlisberger, who, we never know what we're going to get from this team, and I got to like the Lions against them. They could at least put some pressure. They're an option, not the best option, but they're an option. In terms of the running game, they want to establish it, but the Lions aren't the best team for that. They have a much weaker secondary than they do their rush defense. In fact, they're probably giving up about 100 yards per game with the occasional score. And teams like the Bengals, Cowboys, and Bears were just ineffective in their running games. Matt Forte didn't have a good game against these guys. So, Le'Veon Bell is not at the top of my list. I will note that everybody talks about tough matchups, easy matchups in fantasy for running backs. In general, the best defenses are still giving up around 100 yards rushing, and even if it's under 100, they're giving up enough pass yards and even the occasional score to make it worthwhile playing any running back. But you got to consider if they're splitting carries and the such and how the offense is made up. So you can play Le'Veon Bell. He's just not the best guy. In terms of the Pittsburgh Steelers wide receivers, it's a bit of a mess, I will admit. If you look over the last 3 games, Antonio Brown, Emmanuel Sanders, and Jericho Cotchery have all been in the mix. Antonio Brown leads them in terms of receiving yards, so I would say if you need help at the wide receiver 3, he's probably the best option because you kind of know he's going to get you something. And then Jericho Cotchery's got 4 TDs in the last 3 games. That's really impressive. Now, the downside is he might just get you 30 yards one game. So that's where you have to be cautious. But all these guys make for sort of a wide receiver 3. Heath Miller, I would avoid him for now. He's been pretty ineffective as of late, and the matchup just doesn't work. And for everybody who might have gotten a little high last week on Brandon Pettigrew's decent game against the Bears, just pass on him. I mean, before last week, I think he had, I don't know what he had, but it was little. So I'm going to take the Lions on the road.
Whatever it wasn't enough.
Not enough.
All right, the Atlanta Falcons travel to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers coming off their first win of the season last week. Feelings are riding high for the Falcons. Well, you couldn't get any lower. Yes, they've had injury issues all year, 2-7 on the year, and now running back. Yes, I know Steven Jackson's back, so Jason Snelling was not expected to do a whole bunch, but Jason Snelling will not play after being arrested for marijuana possession, so the Falcons are taking the unchief's path to dealing with off-field marijuana arrest. That's all I'm going to say on it in this program. But the Falcons still have too much firepower, and the Buccaneers are still the 1-8 Buccaneers in my mind. Only scoring 16 points a game on the year. That's just not going to do it. I do not think. I am picking the Atlanta Falcons on the road.
Wow. I'm going to go with the Buccaneers in this one, and they're going to build off their previous win. And I'll tell you, I was sort of torn a little bit. When the week started, I thought this is the bounce-back game for Matt Ryan. I mean, he was great against these guys last time, 273 yards and 3 TDs. But the Buccaneers did win the game against the Falcons in Atlanta. So that was sort of cutting against it. But when I saw, we're going to have Roddy White back, and then Harry Douglas and Tony Gonzalez, I was feeling great. And then I'm seeing Harry Douglas has a knee issue. Tony Gonzalez has a toe issue. Either one may not play, and if they do, they might be under 100%. Plus, they don't have a running game. They had a better running game without Steven Jackson and just going with Jaquez Rogers and Jason Snelling, and now they don't even have that. Well, I like Mike Lennon. He threw 252 and 2 last time. These two teams played on 0 interceptions. I think he's a good low QB1 play this week if you need the help. I like Brian Leonard and Chris Rainey as Brian Leonard more is a low-end RB2 if you need the help of both of them as flex plays. Tequan Underwood could make some noise. Bucks tight end Tim Wright could make some noise. Vincent Jackson obviously is a usual must start. So, and I even like Roddy White too. I know he might pull the best coverage, but Matt Ryan's got to throw the ball to somebody. And hey, Roddy played 50 some snaps last time and he came out of it no worse for wear. I'm going to take the Bucks at home. I just think the Falcons, while they were close to being in a position to win it, they're not anymore. And the Bucks got to be riding high after that first win, man.
No doubt.
Second win. Sorry.
Well, no, they've only got one win.
Oh, one win. I'm sorry. They did lose to the Falcons, but I think it was a much closer game than many expected.
Well, Tampa Bay's had a couple close games this year.
Yeah.
All right, the Jets travel to the Buffalo Bills. The E.J. Manuel versus Geno Smith. Dun, 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 dun. Not really, anyway. Geno may be the quarterback of the future, and E.J. may be the real deal eventually. But these are two pretty mediocre teams, with the Jets being slightly better. Stevie Johnson is questionable to play, if not completely out, if I'm not mistaken. And so with that being said, I think that it's going to be a long day in Western New York as the New York Jets will come away with a victory.
Yeah, this is a team coming out of the bye as well, so they've had 2 weeks to prepare. They actually, I don't want to say they stomped the Bills last time, but I believe that it is a true statement. They did win. I want to say they had a bunch of sacks, bunch of defense. Geno Smith did great. My best starts here are going to be C.J. Spiller and Fred Jackson because they put together a decent game the last time around, and that's the Bills' offense runs through it. Geno Smith, I would not play him. I would avoid him this week just because of the embarrassment that he had entering the bye. But last time these two teams played he got 331 and 2. That's pretty damn good. Chris Ivory, the man has been on fire. He makes for a good start this week if you need the help. I like the Jets' defense. Last week the Bills, at the hands of the Steelers, this underperforming defense, 3 sacks, 1 interception, and 227 yards of total offense. That's pretty embarrassing. Scott Chandler, this is a great matchup. The Jets, actually, they're very weak at defending the position, so he could do something. Otherwise, I would avoid everybody else in this game, and I'm handing this to the Jets. I'm so sorry, Bills Mafia.
The Arizona Cardinals travel to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Aside from the fact that they are playing the Jaguars, the best defense that no one is talking about may be the Arizona Cardinals, averaging only 87 rushing yards allowed per game. That's impressive no matter what division, what schedule you are playing. But the bottom line is that these are still the Jacksonville Jaguars, who managed to cling and rally and beat the Tennessee Titans 29-27 last week. Not going to change my mind in this one. Arizona takes this one.
Yeah, I agree. And I heard somebody touting the Jaguars defense, that they actually had one. But I thought, if they actually do have one, why are they still giving up 32 points per game? That's not a good defense. And then you got the Cardinals defense, which is actually very opportunistic, third in takeaways in the league. This is the kind of game where if you need help, you could start Carson Palmer. Andre Ellington should be on fantasy gridirons. This rush defense is awful. I think it's like 153 yards on average, and they have allowed the most rush TDs in the league. It's 14, which is a crazy, crazy number. For all those people that have Larry Fitzgerald that every week bother me about play him, don't play him, play him, don't play him this week. If you need help at tight end, Rob Hausler. He had a breakout 57 yards receiving and a TD last week against the Texans. Where's this guy been? I know some fantasy analysts were touting him as a sleeper. Well, that wasn't a very good prognostication. But right now, based on what we saw last week, and based on the fact that the Jaguars are at the very top of fantasy points allowed to the position, I would consider him a very viable option. Maurice Jones-Drew, I think this is a week to pass on him, as well as Cecil Shorts and Mike Brown.
Alrighty. The Oakland Raiders travel to the Houston Texans. Matt McGloin. Yes, I know it sounds like Pat McGroin, but it's Matt McGloin starting for the Oakland Raiders under center. Terrell Pryor out with a knee injury. Houston coming off a tough loss at Arizona. Following that, another tough loss to the Indianapolis Colts. Following a tough loss at Kansas City. See where I'm going here with this? I am picking the Texans just because the Raiders were marginal with Terrell Pryor, and I know we were talking before the show. You think Matt McGloin's tape could indicates a somewhat successul outing. I'm just going to take the Texans here.
I am too. I think what I was suggesting was that he's not going to be as bad, I think, as people think. What that means, I'm not exactly sure. The way I've been hearing it is just, the Raiders might as well not even show up for the game. But McGloin, he's been a good pocket passer, and he's got a good arm. And if any of these wide receivers are open in the field, he's going to hit them, and he's going to hit them for big plays. Now, that having been said, I wouldn't touch him in fantasy. Who I would touch in fantasy would be Casey Keenum. This is a great game for him to continue his just very impressive march. I mean, this guy's just playing like a vet. He's, in 2 games, 3, I don't know, he's got 4 TDs, hundreds and hundreds of yards passing. Andre Johnson, you play him. He's got, since Keenum's been under center, he's got 355 yards receiving and 5 TDs. Wow. I wrote a great article in Pro Football Players Insiders on him. He's my fantasy football player of the week. It's just, read it. It's great. And it's shocking how well Andre's doing and what he might be able to do if they could keep up this pace. You start the Texans defense, absolutely 100%. They should have a field day. And after this week, I don't know, because they haven't been very good otherwise. I like Ben Tate. I like him as a low-end RB2 or a flex play. I'm still cautious about his ribs, but I was watching some of the film on him, and he actually looks pretty good running. It's just that his averages aren't what they were before the injury. I like DeAndre Hopkins if you need the help. For the Raiders, the only guy I like is Rashad Jennings. I think McGloin's going to do enough that Jennings will probably be the most productive guy for the Raiders, running and catching the football. So I like him if you need the help, especially as a flex play. And again, I'm taking the Texans in this one.
All right, Chargers at the Dolphins. Yes, Jonathan Martin, blah, blah, blah. Richie Incognito, blah, blah, blah. The bottom line is that they have struggled running the ball. And what we thought 3 weeks ago, we were talking about signs of life from Lamar Miller. That come to a crushing halt. The only good thing for Miami is they come up against San Diego, who is allowing 115 yards per game on the ground. And that they themselves, the Chargers on the other hand, are running for 170 yards, which makes this. I look at rushing yards and yards allowed and points allowed when trying to make my picks. I just think that Miami's just too distracted right now, so I'm picking the Chargers on the road.
And I'm picking the Chargers as well. This is a game that's really tough to find really golden fantasy sort of plays, because the Dolphins still have a tough defense, but I wouldn't recommend them in the last, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 games. I mean, they're just not putting up the kinds of stats that are fantasy football significant. So Phillip Rivers, I think he makes for a decent play. He's been struggling a bit. But, if you got to play him and you don't have, let's say if Russell Wilson's your backup, I would definitely play him. But if he's not, then, you can roll with Phillip Rivers. You can roll with Antonio Gates. You can roll with Ryan Matthews as a low-end RB2 and Danny Woodhead as a flex play because they're probably going to make some noise on the ground. Keelan Allen, I think, is a shakier start. But if you've got him, you're probably playing him weekly like I am in one of my leagues as a wide receiver too. And if you're looking for sort of a sleeper defense, I like the Chargers. The Dolphins are they lead the league in sacks allowed, 37, and they're tied for second with interceptions with 12. That is amazing. So if you've got him, you can play him. The Chargers defense, on the other hand, has been bad too. Ryan Tannehill is sort of a sleeper, but I probably wouldn't play him. Mike Wallace, sort of a sleeper, assuming he's active, but I probably wouldn't play him. And Rashard Matthews and Charles Clay. Charles Clay, I think you got to play him if you have him. And Rashard Matthews is sort of a sleeper, but, again, you're kind of looking around going, boy, I think I can do better than this. I'm going to take the Chargers.
The Dolphins started out 3-0, and they got blown out by the Saints on Monday Night Football, and they've lost 4 games since then. And the 4 losses since the Saints loss have been by a total of 18 points.
That's amazing.
So that's just a rough year. And then you throw in this BS off the field. It's just really unfortunate if you're a Dolphins fan.
Absolutely. I always knew walking into this season they would be a year away from turning it around. So it is what it is.
Right. The 49ers travel to the New Orleans Saints. The 49ers coming off a tough slugfest against the Carolina Panthers last week, losing 10-9. The Saints defense is what we thought was a resurgent. They're only allowing 200 yards per game through the air, but they are allowing 118 yards on the ground. Which is not how they had started off. But the offense is still the offense, and they are in the Dome, where they are 5-0 this year. I'm picking the Saints simply because they're at home.
Yeah, I am too, and there are numbers to back that playing at home advantage that the Saints have. But, I got to tell you, as one analyst speaking to you, Keith, I'm tired of people saying that games against the Saints will be shootouts. They are not. This defense is absolutely, absolutely for real. And in fantasy, you got to start it. I mean, just the stats that you pointed out are pretty damn impressive and pretty damn amazing. And a guy like Colin Kaepernick struggles against defenses like this. If anything, the 49ers are going to put the ball on the ground, so Frank Gore is a guy that you start. Now, in terms of the Saints winning this one, playing at home, they averaged 35.2 points of offense. That is absolutely amazing. And besides just being undefeated at home, nobody, and I mean nobody, has scored more than 17 points against them at home. So the Saints are going to win this no matter what. Even though the 49ers have a great defense, you start Drew Brees, you start Jimmy Graham, you start the Saints defense, as I mentioned earlier. And in our Skybox pregame game previews, I have just a boatload of stats that just make it look ridiculously good. I think Vernon Davis is an option this week, but, if I had... if I had him and Kobe Fleener, I actually recommended to somebody to play Fleener over Vernon Davis. I would have played Fleener. So if you have a second good option, I would consider it because this is going to be a tough game. For the Saints, their running game, wow, that was an eye-opener last week. Could they do the same thing this week? Absolutely. In fact, teams that have beat the 49ers have established a strong rushing game. Teams like the Seahawks and the Colts, if you recall, when Ahmad Bradshaw was still on the team, he had a monster game. So we could see something with these guys, but I wouldn't recommend any of them as more than a flex just because it could be shaky as to who does what and how much. And the same thing goes for Marcus Colson and Kenny Stills. They're guys to avoid if you can. At best, they're wide receiver 3s. I think that this Saints team will beat the 49ers handily.
All right, and I'm having some technical issues here, so I'm going to have to take a quick break. We'll be right back in about 3 minutes. You're listening to the Week 11 Starts and Sits in 30 Minutes on 87 Sports Fans Radio.
No one knows who are you. No one seems to hear your cries. And you stop this race against the world. But you know the only way is to tell the truth. About people disagree. I know all you want is to disappear, but now is the time to play the game, to show that you are not afraid, are not afraid, are not afraid, but now everyone sleeps. Could feel what you felt in your last life. You felt in your last life. Still sees face, leaves a bitter taste, and it makes you feel so whole. It makes you feel so whole. Be soft because your wisdom will help you to escape from who want to close your mouth, who want to close your mouth.
All right, welcome back to Week 11 starts and sits in 30 minutes. I think I have things under control here on my end. Let's get back. We have the Green Bay Packers traveling to the New York Giants. The resurgent New York Giants, winners of 3 straight, and I don't know, this blows my mind. The 3-6 New York Giants are a game and a half out of first place right now. It just blows my mind. This team was dead, and they still have a chance at this point to still be in contention for the division. I am going to be picking the Giants at home strictly because I don't think Tolson can do it 2 weeks in a row, passing all over the place. I know that the Giants secondary is decimated, but I'm picking the Giants.
And Keith, I think this is a tough game to pick. I'm going to pick the Packers. I think the Packers defense is a must start this weekend. Here's why. For like the past 8 or 9 weeks, the Giants defense and special teams allows the most fantasy football points in all of fantasy. I mean, they've been at the top. It's crazy. Even coming out of their bye week against the Raiders, they gave up, 3 sacks, an interception, a bunch of fumbles, and a defensive score. So, the numbers just say play the Packers, play the Packers, play the Packers, and I think you should. I like Eddie Lacy, of course. He's just been phenomenal. Over the past 4 weeks, he's got 399 yards, 55 yards receiving, and 4 TDs. I like Jordy Nelson. He has been, even though his production has fallen off, obviously, because of Aaron Rodgers not being there, he's still productive. He's still getting some yards. I like him as a wide receiver 3. And given the fact that Greg Tolzien, who I would never tell anybody to play in fantasy football, but look, he was the 3rd-string quarterback last week, the backup, and he steps in the game and throws a little over 250 yards, a TD, and a couple picks. That's not bad for a guy that really doesn't get much practice time. So now he's got it. He's practicing with Jordy Nelson. I like Jarrett Boykin this week. Jarrett Boykin, I want to say, already he had 112 yards last week on 8 receptions. I mean, he was being targeted left and right. So he makes for a solid play. It's James Jones you want to avoid. You got to wait for him to get back on track. I think he's had 5 receptions in the last 2 games. So you just avoid him. Turning to the Giants, I think the Giants make for a positive play, their defense and special teams. I just don't like them as much as the Packers. I still think the Packers are one of these teams. They just do a good job protecting the ball and their quarterback. In terms of offensive players, I would never tell anybody anymore to play Eli Manning because, every week we think he's going to bounce back. He doesn't. And in fact, if you look at the numbers, the last several weeks, the Giants are emphasizing the running game, which is why Andre Brown, who was supposed to come back and get eased back into game action last week, had 33 touches for 115 yards and a score. I mean, he's the must-start on the Giants. When you look at Victor Cruz, Hakeem Nicks, and Ruben Randall, the guy that you almost have to play is Ruben Randall because he's the guy that's being productive and actually scoring. I think he's got 4 TDs in the last 3 games or so. It's something like that. So if you have Victor Cruz and Hakeem Nicks, this is what I've been telling fantasy owners, you know your team best. If you don't have a lot of depth on your team, you're probably playing them. But if you have a lot of depth and other guys you can play in their stead and still win games, well, then you're benching them. And that's just the way it's going to be for the rest of the season until Eli Manning turns it around or the Giants decide to go in a different direction, which I don't possibly think they can. So for this week, I'm going to take the Packers, but I think it's a tough game to call.
Oh, boy. The Bears fan picking the Packers.
Yeah.
Oh, boy. All right, Minnesota at Seattle. Now, this game has some special interest for fantasy owners who have been waiting for Percy Harvin to return to the field. You look at all the numbers, blah, blah, blah. Seattle's defense is still one of the best in the league, not going anywhere. I'm picking Seattle at home. Minnesota is just they got nothing but AP, and it's not enough.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, AP is the only one on the Vikings that you're playing, and even though I will mention a guy not to necessarily play this week, but of interest is John Carlson, who, if you're a Vikings fan, he seems to be eternally injured and never in there, even though I believe they picked him up in a trade from Seattle, of all teams, and a lot was expected from him. That never happened, but here he is last week, comes out, gets 98 yards and a touchdown, and he looked good, athletic, fast. So, it's not a week to play him, but he's a guy that, I would watch and see how he does. You like Russell Wilson, you like Marshawn Lynch, you like the Seahawks defense and special teams. In fact, Russell Wilson, I think he'll probably have the best fantasy game all week, and if he doesn't, it better be top 5 because everything points to it. Percy Harvin, here's how you deal with the situation. If you have 3 great wide receivers, you don't need Percy per se, leave Percy on the bench. If your third wideout is shaky, or maybe it's a flex, it's a running back, you're not sure about him, go to Percy. The reports are he's going to be on a snap count. What that means, don't know. I've been hearing the number 30 thrown out there. Maybe that's a good number. Percy Harvin can do a lot of damage on 30 plays. So, if you want to take the risk, go ahead. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. And certainly if you have a shaky wide receiver 3 or a shaky flex option, absolutely play him. But if you're good without him, leave him on your bench and see how he does. But, boy, I'm excited to see him coming back.
All right, then the big game of the week everyone's looking forward to is the Kansas City Chiefs at the Denver Broncos. The prolific offense of the Broncos against the Stonewall Kansas City defense, averaging 12.3 points per game. They are 4-0 on the road, obviously. They're undefeated. They are amassing 317 yards per game on offense, which sounds pretty good, but when you compare it to Denver's 459 yards of total offense, they're averaging 353 of it through the air. You wonder, because it's really a bend but don't break defense. They're still averaging 208 yards through the air allowed. Kansas City is, which sounds paltry, but they're also giving up 119 a game on the ground. So where is this going to come? They have a good pass defense, which is powered primarily by a pass rush that was neutralized by a team like the Cleveland Browns. So you have to ask yourself, who are you going to take? Are you going to take the come-out-of-nowhere Alex Smith-led Chiefs on the road, or are you going to take Peyton Manning, who is what he is, and he's at home? I'm taking the Denver Broncos.
Keith, I'm right there with you. I'm taking them too. Here's an interesting stat, or not stat, actually an interesting fact. There's only one quarterback that has thrown 2 touchdowns against the Chiefs, and if you know who it is, boy, you get a special prize.
This season?
This season.
One quarterback that's thrown 2 touchdowns against the Chiefs. Jake Locker?
No, Jason Campbell.
Ha! Go figure.
Amazing, isn't it? But otherwise, I mean, there's been other quarterbacks who've, they've thrown for over 220 25 yards against them. Two almost broke 300. Tony Romo and our mentioned Jason Campbell. So, they definitely are a team that is susceptible in the passing game. Their big defense is sacking the quarterback. They lead the league with 36. And obviously Peyton Manning does not want to be the guy, being sacked and being put on the ground. So I think what's going to happen in this game, the Broncos are going to come out at the beginning and they're going to run the ball and run the ball and run the ball and try and force the Chiefs to put another man in the box to slow them down. And when that happens, that'll open up the passing game. That having been said, you got to love the offensive weapons for the Broncos. You play your usual suspects off the Broncos. I think if there's one player that could be hurt, and I actually have him in one of my leagues, he carries my team many times every week, is Demaryius Thomas. He's going to get Brandon Flowers. It's going to be a tough matchup. I think he'll make some noise against them, but for him to put up a multiple touchdown game, if he does it, God bless him. So I'd play all those guys. I would seriously consider benching the Chiefs defense this week, and here's why. Fantasy football is fantasy football. You want to put your best foot forth, and the team with the least fantasy points allowed to opposing defenses is the Broncos. So it just stands to reason you sit the Chiefs, put your second defense in, and write it out that way. It's just the way to go. In terms of Chiefs players, I mean, obviously Jamal Charles, he's the man. The Chiefs better try to get Dwayne Bowe and Donnie Avery involved in this offense this week, because I think that could be short-lived if the Broncos defense comes around here. While you like to think Alex Smith could blow it up, here's the thing. Look at how many games everybody thought, Alex Smith is going to have a great statistical game, and he did butkus. I would rather avoid him. I would rather avoid Dwayne Bowe and Donnie Avery. I would never play them more than wide receiver threes, but avoid them if possible. If I had to pick between the Chiefs and the Broncos defense, I'd pick the Broncos, only because I don't believe in Alex Smith as much as I do Peyton Manning. But other than that, I think this is a Broncos win.
All right, and the final game on the docket is the Monday Nighter, the New England Patriots traveling to the Carolina Panthers. Carolina Panthers flying high after that win over San Francisco in San Francisco. And before that, and I apologize to all the fans of our site that due to not feeling well, I didn't compile our weekly power rankings. But before the win in San Francisco, I bet you, I can almost guarantee we were the only site that had the Carolina Panthers in the top 10. They were actually 8th in our power rankings. And they defeated the then number 6 ranked San Francisco 49ers. So where is it coming from? Well, it's the defense. The Carolina defense averaging 12.8 points allowed per game. That's right up there. That's Kansas City Chiefs territory. No one's talking about them, though. They're because they score 23.8 points per game, but that's buoyed by 34-point outputs against Atlanta, Tampa Bay, St. Louis, Minnesota, the Giants. Not exactly the end all be all of the defensive defensive world in the NFL. They are allowing 82 yards per game on the ground, but that's okay because New England doesn't really care about running the ball much anyway. Even though I stand by my assertion that they should, I am going to pick the Carolina Panthers at home to send the New England Patriots to 7-3.
Wow. Keith, I absolutely love you. I thought I was going to be the only guy picking the Panthers in the entire world. I love them too. The thing that made it so difficult to try and pick the Panthers was how the Patriots went into their bye week. They beat and spanked the Steelers like 432 yards passing, 4 pass TDs. But what was interesting, and until you stopped and realized it, the Patriots gave up 400 yards passing and 4 TDs. I mean, it wasn't so. It was a tit for tat kind of game instead of a one-sided win, which just makes you think. Even if the Panthers defense broke down, the Panthers offense should be able to hang in there. So, but I don't think that that's what's going to happen. If you look at the Patriots' schedule, they have struggled against good defenses, and they've played against quite a few. And the Panthers are right there, and there's no reason not to think that they won't struggle. And here's another reason to think that. Colin Kaepernick, I forget how many sacks they had last week against him, but the 49ers have one of the best offensive lines, if not the best offensive line in the league. And I don't care how good you think the Patriots' offensive line is, this Panthers' defensive line is just going to maul them. They're going to get to Tom Brady, and they're going to pressure him. So, outside of Rob Gronkowski, I mean, I look around at their fantasy players, and I think, man, if you can avoid most of these guys, you should. Their rush defense is as good is their pass defense. So Stephen Ridley and Shane Vereen, who I think he's coming back this week, they're guys that if you can avoid them, you kind of should. They allow 130 all-purpose yards per game, and rushing score is very, very rare. I want to say it's 3 or 4 the entire season. So the chances of them scoring one, not so good. But if they do, they're going to do it early like they did against the Jets. For the Panthers, I like Cam Newton this week. I think he's a fair play. I think he's a low QB1, and that's how you should treat him. But, when you look at the other guys on the team, Steve Smith, Greg Olsen, not so excited about any of them. I mean, this is a game where the ball could be spread around a lot, and it's Cam Newton who wins and not his playmakers, including D'Angelo Williams, Jonathan Stewart, Mike Tolbert, both guys that all 3 guys you should consider sitting this week. The Patriots and the Panthers defenses, low-end starts, so in other words, DST ones, but on the low end. Panthers ahead of the Patriots. You can look at them that way for fantasy football purposes, but at the end of the day, boy, like you, Keith, I'm calling it a Panthers upset.
Well, there you have it, folks. Everything you would want to know about the NFL Week 11 from a fantasy and a regular gridiron football perspective, but we're afraid to ask. Join us here every Wednesday night at 10 p.m. for 87 Live, the official sports radio show of 87sportsfans.com. For Jim Saranteas from thefantasygreek.com, I'm Keith Grieve, and I guess I'll speak for Steve Taylor from 87sportsfans.com. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you again real soon.